behind the sacred walls of a medieval convent, where silence was law and purity was demanded above all else. A woman lived a double life so scandalous that her story was erased from official records. For nearly 400 years, she wore the black habit of Benedictine sisters during the day, prayed the canonical hours with apparent devotion, and bowed humbly before the abbess. But when darkness fell over the convent, she transformed into something completely different. This is not the story of a saint. It is the forbidden narrative of Sister Lucrezia, the nun who scandalized the church, seduced nobles, accumulated unimaginable wealth, and nearly escaped unpunished from everything. Until one terrible night, her secrets were discovered in such a dramatic fashion that it echoed through the corridors of power for generations. Prepare yourself to know the shocking truth about the woman who transformed a convent into a den of lust, greed, and betrayal. Our story begins in the year 1583. In a small Italian village at the foot of the Alps, there was born Isabella Condorini, daughter of a merchant family in decline. Her father had lost the family fortune in bad investments, and her mother died of fever when Isabella was only 7 years old. With 3 daughters to support and no money for adequate dowries, her father made the decision that so many impoverished families of the era made. He would send his daughters to convents. Isabella was only 12 years old when she was taken to the convent of St. Clare, a respectable institution located on the outskirts of Venice. She had no religious vocation. She felt no divine calling. She was simply being discarded by a family that could no longer maintain her. And from the first day, she hated every moment of that prison disguised as a sacred sanctuary. The first years were of pure misery. Isabella, now Sister Lucrezia, after taking her vows, found herself trapped in a suffocating routine of endless prayers, tedious manual labor, and brutal discipline. The older nuns governed with iron fists. Any transgression, however minor, resulted in severe punishments. Forced fasts, hours kneeling on cold stone, lashes on the back. The monastic life that devotional books painted as serene and spiritual was, in reality, an existence of absolute control and cruelty disguised as piety. But Isabella was not like the other frightened and submissive novices. She possessed an extraordinary beauty that not even the most severe habit could completely hide. Her eyes were a deep brown that seemed to see through people. Her face had the sculpted perfection of Renaissance Madonnas. And when she smiled, which was rare, the effect was devastating. More importantly, she possessed a sharp intelligence and a fierce ambition that would not be tamed by religious vows she never wanted to take. In the year 1601, when Lucrezia was 18 years old, the event occurred that would change everything. A Venetian noble, Count Alessandro Morosini, visited the convent to make a generous donation. He was a man of 45 years, rich, powerful, married, and known for his carnal appetites. During the formal ceremony where the abbess thanked him for his generosity, his eyes met Lucrezia's through the veil. What passed between them in that moment was unmistakable. In the following weeks, Alessandro began to visit the convent with increasing frequency, always with some plausible excuse. New donations, discussions about structural reforms, spiritual consultations. The abbess, flattered by the attention of such an important noble and certainly not insensitive to his generous financial contributions, never questioned these visits. What she did not know was that Alessandro had bribed the sister porter with substantial amounts to arrange secret meetings with Lucrezia. The first meetings occurred in the confessional, an ironically appropriate location. Alessandro would enter from the priest's side, while Lucrezia knelt on the other side of the ornate grate. There, in hurried whispers, they conversed, not about sins and penance, but about desires, about the world beyond the convent walls, about forbidden possibilities. Alessandro described decadent parties in Venetian palaces. Lucrezia spoke about her gilded prison and her dreams of freedom. It was Alessandro who planted the seed of the idea that would transform Lucrezia. He casually asked what she would do if she had money, if she had power, if she had the means to control her own destiny. And something clicked in Lucrezia's mind. The convent had wealth. It managed lands donated by noble families. It received regular payments from the dowries of novices. It controlled investments and properties. All this money passed through the hands of the abbess and the treasurer, and these positions were not permanent. With the right strategy, with adequate patience, someone intelligent could eventually control everything. But first, she needed something she could use as leverage, and Alessandro offered exactly that: information. He had connections throughout Venice. He knew secrets about practically every important family, and he was more than willing to share these secrets with his beautiful nun in exchange for favors that became progressively less platonic. In the summer of the year 1602, Lucrezia and Alessandro became lovers. The meetings occurred in a forgotten storage room in the convent basement, accessible through a passage that the bribed sister porter kept unlocked. What began as weekly meetings quickly became meetings several times per week. Alessandro was completely obsessed. Lucrezia, for her part, was using each meeting to extract valuable information and build her network of knowledge and influence. With the information that Alessandro provided, Lucrezia began to build mental dossiers on each nun in the convent. The sister sacristan had a brother involved in financial scandal. The sister infirmarian had secretly helped a novice terminate a pregnancy years before. The treasurer herself had diverted small amounts to help her impoverished family. No secret was too small, no sin too insignificant not to be filed away in Lucrezia's calculating mind. In the year 1604, the convent treasurer died suddenly. Officially, it was her heart, but there were whispers among some older nuns about suspicious circumstances. Coincidentally or not, Lucrezia had been caring for the sick nun during her final weeks. With the position vacant, the abbess needed to appoint a replacement. To the surprise of many, she chose Lucrezia, a relatively young nun of only 21 years. What the abbess did not know was that Lucrezia had carefully planted seeds of doubt about the other candidates, using the secrets she had collected. A casual conversation here, a veiled insinuation there, and suddenly the most obvious candidates seemed problematic. Lucrezia, in contrast, had presented herself as pious, competent, and totally trustworthy. As treasurer, Lucrezia now had direct access to the convent's financial resources, and she immediately began to build her secret empire. Her first measure was to establish a system of double ledgers. One set showed modest and appropriate numbers for official inspections. The other, hidden in a secret cavity that she herself had created behind a wooden panel in her office, showed the real numbers and her own parallel transactions. She started small, diversions of a few coins here and there, but she quickly became bolder. She discovered that she could inflate supply costs, pocketing the difference. She could report income from convent properties as lower than they really were, keeping the excess. And she could accept bribes from families who wanted to secure privileged positions for their daughters within the convent. But Lucrezia's true stroke of genius was realizing that she could monetize the very walls of the convent in far more lucrative ways. She began to organize discreet meetings between young and beautiful nuns and Venetian nobles willing to pay generously for private access. Alessandro, completely under her control at this point, served as intermediary, recruiting clients among his aristocratic friends. The system worked with mechanical precision. Nobles paid extravagant amounts to Alessandro. He kept a percentage and passed the rest to Lucrezia. She kept the larger part for herself, but distributed small amounts to the nuns involved, and to those whose silence she needed to buy. The sister porter, completely corrupted at this point, facilitated the nocturnal entries and exits, and Lucrezia maintained detailed dossiers on each transaction, each participant, creating a network of complicity and blackmail that guaranteed everyone's silence. In the year 1607, the elderly abbess finally died. The election of a new abbess should have been a democratic process where all professed nuns voted. But Lucrezia, with her years of accumulating secrets and building alliances, orchestrated the outcome with the precision of a chess master. She knew exactly who owed favors, who had secrets to hide, and who needed to be subtly threatened. When the votes were counted, Lucrezia emerged as the new abbess of the convent of St. Clare. She was only 24 years old, extraordinarily young for such a position, but no one questioned publicly. How could they? Lucrezia had become the most dangerous woman within those sacred walls. She knew every skeleton in every closet, and everyone knew that crossing her would have terrible consequences. As abbess, Lucrezia had absolute power over the convent, and she used it to transform the religious institution into something that would be unrecognizable to its founder. On the outside, St. Clare maintained its impeccable reputation for piety and devotion, but inside, it had essentially become a luxury brothel disguised as a convent. Lucrezia drastically expanded her operations. She began to actively recruit novices not for religious vocation, but for beauty and willingness to participate in her schemes. Families were discreetly informed that their daughters could have very comfortable lives in the convent, as long as they were willing to be flexible about certain duties. The system of nocturnal meetings became so regular that there was a schedule, carefully managed by Lucrezia personally. The nobles who visited did not come just for quick encounters. Lucrezia had transformed sections of the convent into luxurious apartments where powerful men could spend entire nights with their favorite nuns. She imported expensive wines, maintained stocks of delicate foods, and even hired musicians who entered secretly to entertain during private parties that occurred in underground chambers of the convent. Money flowed in torrents. Lucrezia accumulated a personal fortune that rivaled that of many noble families. She maintained secret coffers scattered throughout the convent, each locked with keys that only she possessed. She invested in businesses through intermediaries, buying properties in Venice under false names. In less than a decade, she had become one of the richest women in northern Italy, all while wearing the habit of a nun supposedly committed to poverty. But wealth was not enough. For Lucrezia, she developed increasingly extravagant tastes under her simple habit. She wore silks imported from the Orient. Her private cells were secretly renovated with expensive tapestries, luxurious furniture, and even a Venetian mirror that cost the equivalent of the entire convent's annual food budget. She maintained a regular lover, a young Venetian poet 20 years younger than her, who visited 3 times per week and was accommodated in a secret suite that she had ordered. Built, Lucrezia's transformation was complete. The frightened girl who had been forced into the convent had become a woman of immense power, obscene wealth, and total corruption. She governed her small empire with brutal efficiency, rewarding loyalty and crushing dissent without mercy. Nuns who questioned her methods suddenly found themselves transferred to remote convents. In miserable locations, those who threatened to speak faced blackmail or worse. For years, the system worked perfectly. Occasional inspections by the church were easily managed. Lucrezia knew in advance when inspectors would come, had time to hide any compromising evidence, and instructed her nuns on exactly what to say. The inspectors always left impressed with the exemplary piety and order of the convent, without any suspicion of the sordid truth hidden beneath the surface. But like all empires built on secrets and lies, Lucrezia's kingdom eventually began to crack. In the year 1615, a young novice named Marietta arrived at the convent. Unlike the other recent recruits, Marietta had actually chosen religious life out of genuine devotion. She was deeply pious, sincere in her faith, and completely naive about the true nature of the convent she had entered. In the first weeks, Marietta was carefully kept isolated from the nocturnal activities of the convent, but she was curious and observant. She noticed strange behaviors. She heard inexplicable sounds during the night, and she began to ask innocent questions that left the older nuns visibly uncomfortable. Lucrezia quickly realized that Marietta was a problem. She first tried to seduce her into the system, offering small luxuries and explaining that the old rules no longer applied in the modern world. When that failed, she tried intimidation, making clear through intermediaries that asking dangerous questions had consequences. But Marietta, protected by her own naivety and genuine faith, could neither be bought nor frightened. The situation reached a breaking point on a December night in the year 1615. Marietta, unable to sleep, left her cell to pray in the chapel. On the way, she witnessed something that could not be explained or rationalized. She saw nuns in extravagant secular clothing. She heard laughter and music coming from a part of the convent that should have been empty. And when she followed the sounds, she found herself before a scene that completely destroyed her understanding of the world. There was abbess Lucrezia, not in modest habit, but in a red silk dress that revealed more than it covered. She was reclined in a luxurious armchair, drinking wine from a golden goblet, while a young man who definitely should not have been there caressed her loose hair. Around the room, other nuns entertained nobles in various states of drunkenness and indecency. It was a pagan party happening in the heart of a Christian convent. The look of horror on Marietta's face alerted Lucrezia immediately. She rose with an agility that contradicted her apparent intoxication. But it was too late. Marietta had fled, running through the corridors, completely panicked, and Lucrezia knew, with the instinctive certainty of someone who had built everything on secrets, that her empire was about to crumble. Marietta locked herself in her cell, refusing to come out or speak with anyone. For 3 days, she remained there, clearly traumatized by what she had witnessed. Lucrezia considered her options. She could make Marietta disappear. Certainly, it would not be the first problem she had permanently eliminated. But the young novice had influential family in Rome, and her disappearance would attract exactly the kind of attention that Lucrezia needed to avoid. Before Lucrezia could decide on a course of action, Marietta resolved the question on her own. On the 4th night, she escaped from the convent, literally climbing the walls using ropes made from sheets. She ran throughout the entire night until she reached her uncle's house, a powerful cardinal in Venice. And there, between tears and sobs, she told everything she had seen. Cardinal Benedetto Giustiniani initially did not want to believe. The accusations were too extraordinary, too shocking. But Marietta was his favorite niece, and he knew her well enough to know she was not given to fantasies or lies. He conducted his own discreet investigation, sending trusted men to observe the convent, to ask careful questions, to follow the money. What they discovered was worse than anyone imagined. Not just the prostitution scheme, but the complete extent of Lucrezia's financial corruption, the diverted money, the secret properties, the illicit investments. Everything came to light under the cardinal's determined scrutiny. And once he had sufficient evidence, he moved with the speed and determination of an inquisitor pursuing heresy. On the night of the 22nd of March in the year 1616, church forces invaded the convent of St. Clare. It was not a routine inspection. It was a military operation. Armed guards blocked all exits. Inspectors scoured every room, and dozens of people, including several nuns and multiple Venetian nobles, were arrested on sight during what should have been a night of secret festivities. Lucrezia was found in her private chambers, desperately trying to burn incriminating documents. She was wearing a blue velvet dress embroidered with gold thread. Expensive jewels sparkled on her fingers and neck. The contrast between her luxurious appearance and the modest habit she should have been wearing was shocking. When the guards entered, she tried to bribe them with increasingly larger amounts. When that failed, she tried seduction. When that also failed, she finally collapsed, realizing that her reign had ended. The subsequent investigation revealed the complete extent of her operations. The hidden account books were found. Secret treasuries were opened, revealing mountains of gold and silver coins. Letters were discovered detailing scandalous transactions and arrangements. And one by one, terrified nuns began to testify, each confession revealing new layers of corruption. Lucrezia's trial was conducted in absolute secrecy. The church did not want publicity about how completely one of its institutions had been corrupted. But within the private chambers where the proceedings occurred, the details were devastating. Witness after witness described years of exploitation, manipulation, and profanation of sacred vows. The financial evidence showed corruption on a scale that shocked even experienced investigators. Lucrezia, to her credit, did not try to deny or minimize. Instead, she offered a defense that was as brutal in its honesty as it was shocking in its implications. She argued that she had been forced into monastic life against her will, imprisoned in a system that saw her as disposable. She had simply used the tools available to create the life she wanted. If men could seek power and pleasure without censure, why could she not do the same? This defense, far from helping her, only made her situation worse. Not showing adequate repentance was almost as serious as the crimes themselves. The verdict was swift and severe. Lucrezia was found guilty of corruption, blasphemy, violation of sacred vows, and a list of other charges that occupied several pages. The typical sentence for such crimes would be excommunication and perpetual imprisonment in absolute isolation. But Cardinal Giustiniani argued for something more severe. Lucrezia had not only sinned personally, she had corrupted an entire institution, destroyed the faith of dozens of young women, and profaned a sacred place. He demanded the maximum permitted by canon law. On the 12th day of June in the year 1616, Lucrezia Contarini, formerly abbess of the convent of St. Clare, was taken to a specially constructed cell in the basement of a remote convent in the Alps. The cell measured 2 meters by 3 meters. It had no windows. It had no furniture besides a straw mattress. A single iron door with a small opening was the only connection to the outside world. There, Lucrezia would spend the rest of her days. Food would be passed through the opening once a day. There would be no conversations. There would be no books. There would be no visitors. She was being buried alive, condemned to spend decades in absolute darkness and silence, having infinite time to contemplate her sins. But the story does not end there. Fragmentary records from the convent where she was imprisoned suggest that Lucrezia never passively accepted her fate. She sang loudly during the night, disturbing the sacred silence. She screamed blasphemies that made pious nuns cover their ears. And occasionally, she laughed, a sound so disturbing that those who heard it were terrified. Years passed, decades, and slowly, the sounds coming from the cell diminished. The singing became rarer. The screams ceased. Even the laughter stopped. In the year 1647, when nuns brought the daily meal, there was no response from the other side of the door. When they finally opened the cell, they found Lucrezia dead, her body already cold. She was 64 years old. She had spent 31 years in that dark cell, and according to the nuns who prepared her body for burial, she was found with a smile on her face, as if even in death she had kept some final secret that no one else would ever know. Her body was buried in unconsecrated ground, without a headstone, without ceremony. All records of her trial were sealed in the Vatican's secret archives. The convent of St. Clare was closed, its nuns dispersed, and the building eventually demolished. Lucrezia's very existence was erased from official records, but her story survived in fragments, in rumors, in occasional documents that escaped destruction, and it remains as one of the most extraordinary examples of how someone can create absolute power, even in the most restrictive circumstances, and how that power, when built on lies and exploitation, inevitably crumbles. Lucrezia's life raises deeply uncomfortable questions. Was she a victim who became a victimizer? A woman fighting against an oppressive system using the only means available? Or simply a corrupt person who would have exploited any system in which she found herself? The answer probably contains elements of all these interpretations. Lucrezia was forced into a life she did not choose, but her response was not to seek reform or honest escape. It was to create an empire of corruption that destroyed countless lives. She was simultaneously victim and predator, prisoner and jailer. Her story remains one of the most shocking scandals in medieval church history, a dark reminder that sacred walls do not always protect against sin, and that sometimes evil flourishes most intensely in places that proclaim themselves most holy. And on silent nights, in ancient convents throughout Italy, some elderly nuns still whisper about the abbess who sold her soul and transformed a sacred sanctuary into a palace of sins. The scandalous life of a nun that the world tried to forget, but whose disturbing echoes never truly disappeared.